Hey, what's up everybody? This is Sean Woolsegel from Sean Woolsegel Cybersecurity, coming at you again with another episode of Cybersecurity Degree for free. And in tonight's video, we're going to focus on what a cyber attack is and the different types of cyber attacks, the 10 most common cyber attacks that we see typically. And if you're a cybersecurity engineer, you'll recognize these. If you're not and you want to become a cybersecurity engineer, you'll definitely see these eventually. So let's start off with some definitions. So first of all, what is a cyber attack? According to NIST, a cyber attack is any kind of malicious activity that attempts to collect, disrupt, deny, degrade, or destroy information systems, resources, or the information itself. It can also be an attack via cyberspace, targeting an enterprise's use of cyberspace for the purpose of disrupting, disabling, destroying, or maliciously controlling a computer environment or infrastructure, or destroying the integrity of the data or stealing controlled information. It's a really good definition, and I think it really sums up what a cyber attack is. Keywords in there: disrupt, deny, degrade, destroy. Anything that's out there that's trying to take things away from something, it's not a good thing. It's chaos. It's the opposite of peace and order. You don't like cyber attacks unless you're a bad guy, right? It's not meant to be something that is going to help society out in any way, shape, or form. So what are the top 10 cyber attacks that we see? First, I'll list them out, and then I'll go through each one by their definitions. So the top 10 are: number 1, malware; number 2, denial of service; number 3, phishing; number 4, spoofing; number 5, identity-based attacks; number 6, code injection attacks; number 7, supply chain attacks; number 8, insider threats; number 9, DNS tunneling; and number 10, Internet of Things based attacks. This whole list was provided by CrowdStrike. This is in no way, shape, or form an endorsement for CrowdStrike, although I love what they do. You guys are doing awesome work over at CrowdStrike, so thank you for coming up with this list. I'll post about it in the comments below on where you can go ahead and find CrowdStrike's resources. Shout out to Kurt Baker over at CrowdStrike for this awesome list. Thank you, Kurt Baker. Basically, these different things can cause different ways for an attacker to gain an advantage. Malware, the number one way. According to NIST, malware is the hardware, firmware, or software that is intentionally included or inserted in a system for a harmful purpose. Also known as malicious code, also known as software or firmware intended to perform an unauthorized process that will have adverse impact on the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of an information system. A virus, worm, Trojan horse, or other code-based entity that infects a host. Spyware and some forms of adware are also good examples of malicious code. So that's malware in a nutshell. Ways that you can prevent malware: make sure that your stuff is patched. Make sure that you don't have something on your system that is going to allow people to install something where they enter a USB into one of your computers at work, right? And if they put that USB in, it might be loaded with malware, and it doesn't take very much for them to be able to put that on a machine. We'll get deeper into malware later and the ways that people can take advantage of it. We'll do a whole video on malware. The next thing is denial of service attacks. According to NIST, a denial of service attack is the prevention of unauthorized access to a resource or the delaying of time-critical operations. It is also the prevention of authorized access to resources or the delaying of time-critical operations. So you can see that it can cause major disruptions for a system. Let's say you wanted to access your favorite website. Let's say, just for simplicity, let's say it's google.com, and somebody manages to pull off a big enough botnet that they're able to do a denial of service against Google. If they're able to do that, you won't be able to get out to google.com because there will be so many requests flooding Google that you won't ever be able to actually, you type google.com and it'll come back and it'll just be loading and loading and loading. It's just because their servers are just bogged down. Their networking infrastructure is bogged down. So that's denial of service. The next, number 3, is phishing. According to NIST, phishing is a technique for attempting to acquire sensitive data, such as bank account numbers, through a fraudulent solicitation in email or on a website in which the perpetrator masquerades as a legitimate business or reputable person. Also, tricking individuals into disclosing sensitive personal information through deceptive computer-based means. Also, a digital form of social engineering that uses authentic-looking but bogus emails to request information from users or direct them to a fake website that requests information. So phishing is a very prevalent one. You might see it all the time. You might get it in your personal email where you get somebody who is trying to send you something that looks too good to be true. That's phishing. That's somebody sending you something trying to get your personal banking information or your social security number or something along those lines. Those types of phishing attacks, they happen all the time. Number 4 is spoofing. According to NIST, spoofing is faking the sending address of a transmission to gain illegal entry into a secure system. Also, the deliberate inducement of a user or resource to take incorrect action. Note, impersonating, masquerading, piggybacking, and mimicking are all forms of spoofing. We'll go through spoofing a lot more in detail, but here are the things you need to know about spoofing. You'll see things like domain spoofing, again, where you'll say google.com and it'll be spelled with too many O's or too many G's or maybe a couple extra L's or E's. So google.com or googly.com. You'll see that's a domain spoof. And so somebody will type that in and then pretend to be Google, and it's really not. An email spoof is the same thing. Like if you have a company, your company is abcdcorp.com, and they're spoofing your domain by saying abcdecorp.com. Somebody accidentally types that extra thing in there, and then they send it, or they send it to you pretending to be you, and those types of things allow them to take advantage of your reputation and try to steal your information. Another one is ARP spoofing, or ARP, which is Address Resolution Protocol. And so what that is what we call ARP poisoning, and that is a form of spoofing attack that hackers use to intercept data. Number 5 is identity-based attacks. Identity-based attacks aren't necessarily defined out on NIST, but I do want to let you know what identity is according to NIST. NIST defines identity as the set of physical and behavioral characteristics by which an individual is uniquely recognizable. It is also the set of physical and behavioral characteristics by which an individual is uniquely recognizable. Again, you see that key word, uniquely recognizable. Very important. So this allows attackers to gain access to systems a lot differently than they have in the past. And you'll hear this more whenever I get into zero trust. But identity-based attacks are very much on the rise, especially since the days of COVID, where we have a loss of a physical perimeter around the outside, where you would organize your network with things like firewalls, and now you have a ton of people who work remote or hybrid, and so the attackers have to think differently, and as a result, they get into trying to steal somebody's identity to gain access into systems. There's a lot of different attacks out there. Again, CrowdStrike has a great list of resources on here. Kerber roasting is one. Man in the middle, pass the hash, silver ticket attacks, credential stuffing, password spraying, and brute force attacks. All really big ones that are out there to go ahead and allow somebody to try to take advantage of somebody's identity. Ways that you can prevent this: multi-factor authentication. Definitely use multi-factor authentication. It's a huge benefit in today's society, and try not to use SMS as your MFA. You don't want to use SMS or text messaging. You want to be using a credential-based app, something like Google Authenticator or Authy. Very important. You can use other things as well. There's tons of different authenticator apps out there, but definitely make sure you're using MFA, and definitely enforce strong passwords. Also, user education plays a huge part in this. So identity-based attacks, very important to go ahead and take special note here that these are very much on the rise, And in fact, CrowdStrike says that there's 80% of all breaches use compromised identities, and it can take up to 250 days to identify. So keep an eye out for this. This is a big one that's definitely on the rise. Number 6 is code injection attacks. So code injection attacks are a way for an attacker to inject malicious code into some type of system or network. And that can be problematic. Things like SQL injection, things like cross-site scripting. And so with these types of attacks, you're going to see somebody trying to take advantage of a website's database, somebody trying to take advantage of poor coding practices on a website that they built. Those types of things are going to be the way that people were able to take advantage of code injection. And they do things like bug bounty, which is another cybersecurity career path. If you're interested in doing that, you can prevent things like code injection attacks and make a lot of money doing that. Number 7 is supply chain attacks. According to NIST, a supply chain attack is an attack that allows the adversary to utilize implants or other vulnerabilities inserted prior to installation in order to infiltrate data or manipulate information technology hardware, software, operating systems, peripherals, such as information technology products or services at any point during the life cycle. Supply chain attacks are a type of cyber attack that targets a trusted third-party vendor, and it can involve anything from your software to your hardware. And essentially, whenever you have something like this happen, maybe you have a malicious chip that's in your computer, or maybe you have a malicious piece of software that's written into the machine that you received. Those are the types of supply chain attacks. The only thing that I can recommend here for supply chain attacks is to go ahead and use trusted resources whenever you purchase things. If you're working in a place where you are able to use trusted resources, absolutely do so. Make sure that you're using the best ways possible. Of course, you can't prevent everything. You never know if you're getting a product from maybe China, and China puts something in there that's going to harm your computer and harm your systems at your work, in your enterprise. Those types of things can happen and completely destroy everything that you're working towards. Number 8 is insider threats. An insider threat is essentially somebody who is internal to your organization, and they can take advantage of being inside to go ahead and gain access to secure data. And this is why it's super important to do zero trust and need to know, because if they have access to certain things, certain data like intellectual property or IP, they might be able to distribute that out to somebody who is a competitor of yours, and then you've just lost all this money that you could have been making. And so you have to vet your people. Insider threats do happen, and it's very important to make sure that you have a good HR team in place and a legal and compliance team in place to go ahead and prevent insider threats from happening. Set good guidelines, set good cybersecurity training education programs, and make sure that you can keep track of insider threats. Number 9 is DNS tunneling. According to CrowdStrike, DNS tunneling is a type of cyber attack that leverages domain name system queries and responses to bypass traditional security measures and transmit data and code within the network. So you can clearly see that this could cause major problems. And again, we're at number 9 here, so it's not quite as common as the first couple, but it certainly is possible. The major problem here is that tunneling toolkits and guides are available on websites like here on YouTube or on another website or streaming platform. You might have these DNS tunneling resources readily available, or maybe you can purchase them. The best way to prevent this is to go ahead and monitor your network. Do things like an intrusion detection system, intrusion prevention system. Make sure that you're using firewalls. Make sure that your resources that you're purchasing have things where you're able to check for anomaly detection. That's important. You want to make sure that you're using next-gen firewalls instead of your typical firewalls. Make sure you're using the latest available resources if you're able to, if you can afford it, to prevent these DNS tunneling attacks. And number 10, last but not least, is Internet of Things based attacks. NIST defines the Internet of Things as a user or industrial device that are connected to the internet. Internet of Things devices include sensors, controllers, or household appliances. And that's a really good definition because you can have light bulbs, you can have switches, you can have speakers, anything that is a typical thing without maybe a screen, fridges, microwaves, ovens. There's all sorts of different things that are Internet of Things devices nowadays. And this is a really bad problem for things where you have what we call OT, which is operational technology. And so with this OT, you have things like power plants, and you have places like water treatment facilities that have old infrastructure, and they've tried to upgrade it and made it more modernized with new Internet of Things devices. And in doing so, they've introduced risk into those areas. So now you have companies like Dragos coming out and trying to mitigate this risk that has been introduced. So those are the top 10 most common types of cyber attacks according to CrowdStrike. And again, thank you CrowdStrike for those resources. Cyber attacks are definitely on the rise each and every day. It's our job as cybersecurity engineers to go ahead and protect organizations, and it's going to be your job if you want to go ahead and become a cybersecurity professional. If you want to go ahead and stop the bad guys, you have to go ahead and stay vigilant against these types of cyber attacks. And these are always changing, mind you. Things go up and down lists all the time. So make sure you're staying vigilant and staying aware of what the latest trends are. And that's it for tonight's video. I really appreciate your time and thank you for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful night.